The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, medicine for these times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I have Daniel McQueen here with us today, joining us from Colorado. Hi, Daniel. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Beth. It's good to be here.
It's so good to have you. And I've heard so much about your work and even had clients go through your program. So finally, we got you on here, and I can't wait to dive into it, especially coming from the epicenter of everything that's happening right now here in the U.S., in Colorado. So Daniel McQueen, a master's, is a psychedelic specialist, educator, and author of the book Psychedelic Cannabis, Therapeutic Methods and Unique Blends to Treat Trauma and Transform Consciousness. In 2012, he co-founded the first legal psychedelic plant medicine therapy center in the United States, the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness, which is located in Boulder, Colorado. The same year, Daniel also founded Psychedelic Sitter School, which continues to train students from around the world in mindfulness-based psychedelic therapy and cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy. And Daniel's going to be talking to us about also, now that in Colorado, you can work with Psilocybin and even DMT, and we're going to hear a little bit more about what's happening over there. But Daniel, one of the first questions I always like to ask is, how did you get onto this path of teaching and training and holding space for psychedelic therapy? And did you used to have some other totally unrelated career at all on your path?
Yeah, it's like a lot of us have unrelated careers before this, right?
Yeah.
Psychedelics were always like the theme of my adult life, but I was a corporate accountability activist in Washington, D.C. before this path. And I was initiated with medicine work pretty young in intentional communities, so in my early 20s. So I've had a pretty long path in the intentional realm. And my first mushroom journey, I was 18, and what stood out from that was I understood a book about Einstein that I was reading. Like, it was just something that was way over my head. But once I was sitting with it, with the ideas of it on psilocybin, I understood it, and it was my mindsets getting in the way, my previous mindset. So that opened me up to the potential of psychedelics. I've always been an explorer and a curious human being, and I think I just have natural gifts around holding space and working with others, making them feel safe and comfortable so they can go really deep. And I think it was 2012, we started the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness, and I just graduated from Naropa with a counseling degree, and we wanted to do harm reduction work. 13 years ago, it's like lots changed since then even. And so we started teaching a program on harm reduction and sitting for your friends and things. And I did that for a couple of years, and cannabis became legal. And Colorado was one of the first states in the country to have legal cannabis and for adult use. And a friend of mine just suggested we start experimenting with it as a potential resource for teaching how to facilitate. And one of our very first attempts to work with cannabis, a friend of mine jokingly accused me of putting DMT in the medicine. And and I knew I hadn't, right? Nobody, there was definitely no DMT in that. And at that point I realized maybe we were onto something. Maybe we should explore that more. So one thing led to another, and we created a program around cannabis-assisted psychedelic therapy and using cannabis as a psychedelic medicine. like you said, I wrote a book on how to make cannabis a psychedelic and use it as a therapeutic tool. And we've been growing ever since. And this year we're starting to bring in psilocybin for personal use, and we're about to initiate our DMT program here. So,
which I can't wait to hear about. I'm like, wow, this is the first time I've really heard someone say like, yeah, well, now we can use DMT legally in this therapeutic setting. And it's like, oh, okay, great. This will be interesting.
I think you're as surprised as I am about this turn of events. So a lot of gratitude for Colorado voters, and the people, the activists that brought this into the world. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's interesting how fast it's been moving, and I, what I would say as a kid, as a teenager, I said, oh, psilocybin will definitely be legal in our lifetime. And people thought I was crazy, but it just made sense. But I just didn't imagine it'd be like MDMA and ketamine back when ketamine was known as K, a party drug. But let's get into, the work that you do. And also, I want to talk about the differences between different medicines used for therapy, and also the opportunities for people out there who want to get into this work. So as you know, and as a lot of people know, there's just this interest and growth in people wanting to become psychedelic therapists or psychedelic facilitators. And, I work with mostly coaches and healers and some therapists and people who are kind of integrating psychedelics in, but not necessarily like straight up underground facilitators, because, most places it's still underground.
Sure.
But what do you say to people who, let's say, want to maybe get into psychedelic assisted therapy, but they don't want to go to school for, a master's or, go to school for 6-8 years? Is your training and some of the other trainings out there, is this a pathway? And how does that work? Like, how can someone do this, just by going to a training program? Or can they?
Yeah, they can. So our program, it's called Psychedelic Sitter School. And, but it's like, that's really just the first level of our program. We go as far as people will let us take them. So we work with young folks, who are starting their program, their profession. And then we also work with, I think our average age is like around 45 of our students. So a lot of people are either in psychotherapy or the healing arts already, or they wish to transition into this work, from another profession. And so we get a lot of that. I'd say maybe a third to a half are mental health professionals and licensed. And so we have our program invites non-licensed and licensed practitioners into the work. In our clinic here, we have about 12 practitioners, and it's a mix of mental health practitioners, licensed counselors, and we have 2 ministers on our staff and other allies, and people who have transitioned out of underground work as well. So so it's more than, so our training program, it's a series of intensive experientials where we actually do a lot of hands-on work. We're inviting our students to go into their own journey work experience and are guiding each other pretty regularly. And so that's one of the benefits of working with Cannabis, is that we can get a lot of good work done in a short period of time. And we don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to go to Jamaica or other places to do these like one-off retreats. So we're a very experiential training program. And I have students all over the country, and a lot of them have started private practices, both licensed, non-licensed mental health practitioners, and then, like I said, people transitioning. A lot of coaches. We have a few hypnotherapists, So, and we have a credentialing program where we invite people to go through this process of accountability and oversight and community support and a lot of practice sessions, so there's a lot of supervision and mentorship through that process. And we feel really confident that we're able to train people to be competent facilitators and guides, even if they don't have clinical experience. But we do have clinical coursework where we teach people how to work with post-traumatic stress and, other mental health concerns. If they're non-licensed, maybe they work in conjunction with the person's a mental health care provider, right? So there's a collaboration there and a handing off, right? What we found is that having a background in psychotherapy and private practice is really beneficial. They already know like kind of this basic setup of how the business of being a private practitioner works. And there's some good skill sets in psychotherapy. But even with that being said, we have multiple students who don't have that background who can gain the skill sets they need to be a competent and, financially viable, successful psychedelic facilitator. With the rates, depending on your practice, like your practice, we consider this a specialty of a psychotherapy practice, right? So you could technically charge a little bit more than you would in psychotherapy, but even if you're not a psychotherapist, there's some good living wages that can support. We also have like a work study program, and we have a lot of young professionals or young 20-somethings working in our clinic, helping us with managing the program. And then they're like our assistant sitters. So we even have like a vocational program in our organization for like the younger practitioners, so they can get a lot of good experience in a safe container as well.
Yeah, I want to ask some questions. You mentioned viable wage and money and, finances, which is something I've talked about. And of course, in the psychedelic space, this tends to trigger a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, there's a couple things here. There's most of these medicines, not all. There's some that are shorter lasting, like, I don't know, MDMA, ketamine, maybe cannabis. I actually don't work with cannabis because of that reason. With the DMT, it's way too strong for me, oddly, because I can work with ayahuasca, no problem. But, how does a therapist offer this and make it somewhat accessible, but also still be paid? Because these are not hour-long sessions. These are not just like, hey, you come in and then on to the next, and you're doing, 6 to 8 sessions a day in order to make $100,000 a year. What do you say to this? Because I'm sure it's come up in conversation before about how expensive psychedelic therapy is, and how, I don't know if people can really hold psychedelic therapy space, 18 times a week in order to make, you know what I mean? So how do we solve this problem, or what are your suggestions for this?
So I think that's going to be one of the big problems to solve in our community, because it's not like another business where you can just do it over and over again and go home and do it again, weeks and weeks and weeks, right? So what is a sustainable facilitator workload? And then can we pay them well enough within that workload so that they can have a viable life, right? So the idea is like, you don't want to make less money doing psychedelic therapy work than you could in a regular psychotherapy practice, right? Like, it's just not viable. Like, why would a really competent psychotherapist do that? So we've been open for about 8 years now. We have a team of about 12 practitioners, and we've watched them grow and develop a capacity to hold journey work experiences more regularly and with resiliency and self-care and all of that. But it takes at least a couple of years, we've noticed, for people to grow into that space. So I'd say a good percentage of our practitioners have a half-time or part-time private practice or other side gigs. So it's not as intense as the psychedelic medicine experience. And then we work with session hours a week, and what I would consider full time for a psychedelic practitioner, including preparation, integration support, and the journeys itself, I would consider full time about 25 hours of like session hours, because you have like note taking and meetings and recovery time outside of that. With psilocybin, like a lot of the practitioners I know who are like competent underground practitioners, they do one a week, and then they would consider a heavy lift 2 a week, right? And so again, how do you create a full-time position around these things? And one of the things I love about working with cannabis is that it's a 3-hour or 5-hour session. And so whereas MDMA or MDMA, or not, we don't work with MDMA yet, right? But it's coming. Our psilocybin sessions are 8-hour journey experiences, and that's a full 10-hour day, right? And we also have a lot of support around the practitioner. So we have a good back end office where we do a lot of the logistical work, all of the scheduling, so that the practitioner can focus on just what they're good at, the facilitating, and that seems to help as well. So I think it's like a combination of knowing that it's not a normal job. You can't treat this like a normal job. We give our practitioners time off, and it's a real flexible schedule for them. And we notice that it kind of ebbs and flows. Their workload kind of ebbs and flows naturally based on their need for self-care. So it's almost like something else is taking care of them in a way, But we have a lot of flexibility in the program and support, and that's the only way I can see to do it. So nobody has like quotas or anything, but they also get bonuses if they reach certain thresholds, so that so that there's like a little motivational feature there, that if they work more, they get paid a little bit more, because it's easier on our end to work with more full-time guys than a lot of part-time guys. Does that make sense, just as a business? And then rate-wise, so how to make it more affordable, so I think the group model, like the group practice model, helps with that. So like our newer practitioners offer a lower rate than our more experienced practitioners. We also have scholarship program to support, like somebody really needs the help. We have certain slots for scholarships, and that helps. And that as a group, we can hold more scholarships and more lower rate clients than like an individual practitioner could. And then the real threshold of making it more accessible is small group experiences. And I've been working with groups with cannabis for years now, and we started working with clinical groups for ketamine, and that cuts the price down by half. And plus, we're able to offer more therapeutic support in those sessions. So it's really labor intensive. And if you want to work with like a practitioner who has like mental health training and, like master's degrees and stuff, like it is not inexpensive for an hourly rate. But, what we also do is we disclose everything, all the prices up front, and make sure people can afford it. And then we also make sure they can afford the full protocol that we would recommend for whatever their concerns are. So we're not, so that we know that they can move through the whole process, get the support they need, instead of stopping halfway through because they can't pay for it. And so more work to be done, but we're really doing everything we can to make it as accessible as possible and still pay our people a good living wage.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all that. Yeah. And we'll see what happens, as hopefully there's, supply and demand maybe evens out pricing, or legalization, or decriminalization. Yeah. Who knows? But I'm curious, do you know what the average rate for, let's say, private underground psychedelic therapy goes for around other parts of the U.S.? Because you're in Colorado, it's, a different story than the majority of the U.S., where it's still illegal and most people are operating underground. Mm-hmm. Do you know what kind of the average range is for pricing?
For underground practitioners, it's across the board. Like I've seen it as low as like $500 a session for, people who, don't have a lot of training or experience and just, want to do it. And I know some good practitioners, it's like $2,500 for a psilocybin journey with prep and post support. And that's about where we're at. We offer, because of the type of center we offer like this medical review process, so that increases our cost a little bit. We also have a second person in the room. We have an assistant sitter in the room for a lot of reasons, and that increases our rate a little bit. But the people who want to work with us, want that level of support, right? And then on the other end, I know of practitioners who are charging $5,000 or more per session with lots of like ongoing prep and integration support and things like that. I would consider that a little bit higher than I would feel comfortable offering, right? So our rates are based off of therapeutic, like the standard therapeutic rates in our area. So that's kind of where I landed on. And we, and our legal expenses are probably way more than a typical, like cannabis, or not a typical psychotherapy center, so I hope things even out a little bit, but I don't see them evening out really anytime soon. It's very dynamic.
Yeah, speaking of legal, I want to ask you about what's going on in Colorado. I mean, it's only been a few months since they passed this this law, Proposition 122, and I personally have not been able to follow it. But I know there was some concerns about, let's say regulation and not being able to, let's say, practice in more of the shamanic indigenous pathways of, working with plant medicine ceremonially. Are you concerned at all about maybe this whole industry of, like the direction that legalization is going towards a place of regulation where it's maybe going to be dominated by the same 3 to 5 companies, like kind of like big pharma is with the general healthcare? Do you have any concerns around this, or are you just happy it's legal and it is what it is? I mean, I'd love to know what what you hear also in the community out there.
Yeah, so Prop 122 was passed in the last election in November, and started to be implemented in like the beginning of the year, and so we immediately started to practice under the personal use side of the law. There's two pathways with Prop 122. There's this regulated access side, primarily starting with psilocybin, where everybody gets licensed, and we're gonna go down that path when it becomes available. Get our center license and our training program licensed, and then there's this personal use side, which we're already working under. And then not long ago, the legislature got their hands on it, and they tried to strip most of the personal use out of the bill, and there was a huge reaction to the community, and I think. And it was proposed by a Democrat, like my senator, my state senator here in Boulder, Colorado, proposed that. So there was a letter writing campaign and a lot of pressure put on them, and they ended up allowing the personal use side in compensation for facilitators. So the new tag word is licensed facilitator, and I'm trying to get out of the habit of using the word facilitator. So that's going to be under the regulated side. So you have to be a licensed facilitator on the regulated side, but there's nothing stopping. They were able to get back in the law provisions that allowed indigenous community practitioners, spiritual practitioners, to provide medicine experiences and receive payment for those services. So that stayed in the law. It's really, really great. And then on the clinical counseling side, it also allows counselors to provide the medicine and offer bona fide harm reduction, support services, and other things around the medicine. So that's still in the law. What they did change is we can't advertise as openly as we could have before Prop 122 changed. But there's also something called freedom of speech, and we can talk about what we do all we want. So there's a question of how much we'll be able to actually advertise, because it's not super clear in the law. So as far as concerns go, I think there's going to be a lot of new players come in. I think there's and I meet everybody. I know a lot of people in the arena, and I see a lot of very corporate interest and marketing focused interest coming in, and it's a very different identity as a practitioner than we kind of came out of the underground. We built our program from the ground up, and we're practitioners, right? We're facilitators. So my hope, we're gonna show up as best we can, and I don't really think the word compete is the right word for us to use in this space, but engage this new arena and show that we can do this work with really good high standards and maintain kind of the identity and values of the psychedelic community. And I think what we have going for us over the corporate interest is what I said about, this isn't a normal job. This isn't something that you can really create a business plan around and it work as expected. And I think we're going to see a lot of people try to do that and not really thrive in that space. So it's going to be real dynamic. There's going to be a lot of big things happen and big announcements, and then a lot of crashes too, and so I'm in my little ship here, I'm going on my little journey, and I see these big boats passing me by, and I'm just try not to. Okay, Daniel, you're not missing out. everything's fine. And I'm still here 10, 12 years later. And eventually I'll sometimes see the wreckages of the ships that pass me by. It's not uncommon. So I'm hopeful. And I also trust the medicine, right? Like, there's got to be some alignment with the medicine. Otherwise, it's just going to reveal where you're misaligned as a practitioner and a business owner more than anything. And that either gets addressed or not. And the people who are able to address the big transformational waves will be able to thrive in this space, So...
Thank you for saying that, because I totally get it. It's been very interesting to watch the frenzy, and to see even these big companies, go public and realize like they can't scale the way that traditional, companies that go public have boards and shareholders. Of course, they need returns, or else, they're going to piss off everybody, and then they just crash. And I really appreciate what you just said. This is how I've been approaching everything for many years, is really to try to trust this medicine and that its own spirit that it has, that it is here for some reason, that it's coming out like this, that it's, we're all working together on, for what I like to think of as the greater good of all. At least that's what I try to, that's how I approach it. And I like to project that onto everybody else. But it's a concern. Even I said I have a client who works at one of these psilocybin service centers out in Oregon, and she said the price list went public, and there was just like outrage over the pricing, and they're not taking into consideration, like you said, like the legal fees and the regulation, and like the amount of time it takes to even learn how to follow the rules. And there's just so many nuances. And I think we forget that this is all still so new. Yeah. But I love, you did say there's a lot of people just kind of coming in. And something I've noticed, especially in the last year, because now I'm in, 12,000 different groups and chats, and I don't even know how I got in most of them, but there's now like a facilitator on every corner, right? Yeah. Like, it's kind of getting to this place of, like, I could go do any substance like within a few miles from where I live, like with anybody, and I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. And you're running training program, or multiple training programs, there's other programs out there, is there any discernment for like who we let into these programs and what is their experience? Like, we've all heard stories of someone who's maybe only microdosed since 2020, and now they want to serve people, 5 grams of psilocybin in a underground setting. I mean, should we be concerned, or what do you say? Because then I've heard the other side, which is, hey, people want healing. This is the only way it's accessible. There's a high supply and a high demand, not enough supply. Yeah. But how do you come to terms with this? Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated. I don't want to prohibit, but, education, educating people as much as we can about what would be considered safe use practices and how to assess guides and facilitators. Ask what questions to ask, like, how long have you been doing this work? Where's your training? Can you verify the training? When you hear somebody say something like, well, the medicine told me I could do this work, right? And so we have to consider certain mental health concerns in certain cases. And in the extreme cases, this could be a diluted belief system. Like, I took the medicine once, it told me I could do it, and now I'm a guide and facilitator. The truth is, maybe that's a real message. And we know our students come to us because they've had those experiences of, I'm inspired to be a psychedelic guide. I have too. But would you go to a doctor that told you, hey, I'm a heart surgeon, I've had my heart operated on once, so I can do this work now, right? So there's a little bit of like a delusion of grandeur going on in the community, and the medicine work can do that. Like psychedelic medicines can, open you up to this grand vision of who we truly are. And so what happens is we see our potential and we believe it's fact. And so that's like a fallacy, like a logical fallacy to say, I have this potential and I am that without growing into it. And so the best people are the ones who take it slow, get the training, and go through a process. So our program, we've created this developmental process of growth where we invite people to immediately start practicing being a guide, but start with your friends and family and start with cannabis. Like if you want to work with DMT, maybe you should start with something that feels a little gentler just to make sure you're ready for the big waves. And then also don't work with people who have significant clinical concerns if you don't have clinical training or you don't have that experience of working with someone, because that's a really different experience than like hanging out with your buddy John on a Saturday night, you know? So we have the training, we have the experiential practice, and then the last piece I think is super important, which a lot of these practitioners don't have, who are just like coming out and don't have any training, or, you know, like Spirit told them they could and things like that. And that's community accountability. So are you part of a community that offers peer support? And do you adhere to a code of ethics, right? And a particular protocol that we know is safe? Are you trained in what a proper dose looks like, right? You know, so even though there's a huge demand, people are going to get hurt if they work with practitioners who don't have the experience they really need, even though they think they can do it. And so long term, one thing that could happen is somebody with no training, somebody dies, it derails the whole movement, right? Because, you know, the media loves that stuff. The maybe best case scenario, something like that, is because, and especially in Colorado, which I think is like lovely, is there's a lot of protections around the use of psychedelics. So you can't really get discriminated against if it comes out that you've used psychedelics. And so there's very little reason why not to call out a practitioner who's acting unethically. And I hope that gets kind of balanced out in the end. But in the short term, it's all about education. You know, and like podcasts like yours and other people just get the word out. Like, would you go to a doctor who doesn't have any training, right? Like, would you go to a mechanic who's never touched a car before, or only like taken apart one car, you know, and doesn't know any of the parts, you know? So there's a little bit of something going on that we have to call out in our community, you know?
And also just playing devil's advocate, because I've said this one too, is, well, we've all been to really bad doctors who've been practicing for 35 years, who went to the best med schools and, you know, have all the degrees. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, there's probably people out there who've done, you know, 10 years of training, but maybe they haven't actually done like real psychedelic work with themselves. You know,
Oh,
like
that's
I don't.
right, yeah.
I don't know if microdosing to me doesn't tell you what it's like to take 5 grams of psilocybin.
No, I don't think that prepares you at all. So that would be another requirement we would consider, is to do your own work with the medicine. If you're going to be a guide in the mountains, you know, like maybe you should get in the mountains on occasion, and not just pray to the mountain spirits, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'm glad you
so absolutely. And the other thing, like there's no one path, there's no one training program, there's no one modality. I really want to step out of this mindset of monopolizing in any professional identity, particularly medical or the psychotherapy. There's just way more to it than medicine work, than pathologizing it, you know.
Thank you. So, I've actually I've talked about psychedelic sovereignty, how it really, I mean, I encourage people to really tune in, be discerning, you know, like know what works for you. And honestly, yeah, like you might have some bad experiences, because haven't we all, but as long as there's no harm being done, or like, that's my biggest nightmare too, is seeing something terrible happening, it going all over the media, and then the whole movement is now derailed because of a couple, you know, people that just cause harm.
Yeah,
but
it really happens. It really happens.
I like to believe that the majority of the stories out there, which we don't hear about, are actually positive versus, you know, the transgressions or the harm, which is what we tend to hear about more.
95% or more is probably all really great. You know, but, you know, real harm can be done, and people have lost their lives. And the other thing is not everybody can afford a guide. And so like creating a model that requires a facilitator, I don't think is ethical, right? And that's why I love working with cannabis. And I wrote a book, for all the people who like are really curious about this. Maybe cannabis is legal in your area. You don't want to break the law. Don't know how to do it. Maybe you've got some trauma, So I wrote this book. It's $20 or 16 or something like that. And go out and do it, right? But there's certain you can create the right setting. You can create the right, like energetic and like safety container. You can create agreements with friends and family who are near you to keep an eye on. There's so many things that you can do to reduce the possibility of harm. You're kind of ethically required to do it that way, right? At least a way, right? That increases intentionality and safety, because these experiences are so meaningful and so beautiful when done in the right way. They're like I have to tell my new practitioners, like, you got to get used to miracles happening, and it can be overwhelming to just be in a space where like you see this unfolding transformation all the time. Like the positivity can be overwhelming to people.
Beautiful. Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about, what's happening out there with you bringing DMT into the training and teaching. And it's, I'm also curious to hear about all the different medicines. We all know that some are maybe better for some reasons and some for others. But, are there people out there that maybe just shouldn't even be doing any psychedelic therapy because there's certain patternings or, energetic patterns in their body type that just can't handle it, and maybe it brings them more into a trauma loop? Do these things come up? And then also, how is DMT playing a part in therapy?
Yeah, good questions. They're very packed with a lot of complexity in a good way. Yeah. So we started working with psilocybin. We've been doing that for a few months now. And we're bringing in DMT, N,N-dimethyltryptamine, into the program. We're actually starting this week. We have our first group experience with that. I'm not sure yet. Because working with psilocybin and DMT is still under the personal use side, so the therapeutic components of it will be almost secondary with these big medicines. But we could say things like, evidence suggests that psilocybin is good for the treatment of major depression or end-of-life anxiety, right? So we can't technically treat things with these particular medicines. So we're learning the ropes and exploring the law around that right now. We're pretty strict about what we would call contraindications, like who can do this work and who can't. And we have good safety screens and all of that. I would say so. We specialize in working with severe post-traumatic stress and a lot of the cluster of symptoms that go around PTSD. So, but it has to be done in the right container for support, right? It's just not like 1 or 2 sessions and someone's done, especially when there's real healing. But contraindications would include schizophrenia and psychosis, some bipolar disorder, dissociative identity disorder. We don't work with personality disordered folks for a lot of reasons. So we
even borderline.
No, we don't work with borderline.
Interesting, because there's a lot of people in the psychedelic world who seem to have borderline personality.
Well, within the guides too.
No, just I've encountered just along my path of 30 something years. It's kind of interesting how much it's come up, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. They're like coming to an ayahuasca ceremony.
Well, if you think about think about this. I've had to study this stuff because it's so certain disorders can be so damaging to communities, right? So we have really strong screening. But if you think about psychedelic medicines, is that they, by definition, they're breaking apart ego structure, right? And the idea is rigid ego structure will help, you break it apart and then you rebuild it in a more healthy identity, right? But somebody who already has a broken ego structure, particularly around personality disorders, it just makes things worse. And they loop, and there's no progress, there's no movement forward, no getting out of it. But another thing about like overuse of psychedelics can induce mental states that are very similar to personality disorders. So you hear people in the psychedelic community, oh, just take more medicine, it'll solve all your problems, right? Certain people, that's like the worst thing you could do for them is invite them to take more medicine. They need to find their foundation again. They need to build their structure back up. We do our best to not harm people in this space, and we found that personality disorders it doesn't, like maybe in the future there's going to be centers that are inpatient facilities that that really know how to work with ego structures like that and have the right support level. But I don't know of any clinic or center or practice right now that has that capacity to hold the really severe mental health concerns like that. But PTSD, that's like like most of our struggles in humans comes from trauma, and these medicines are designed to help people with PTSD, or even like, lower than post-traumatic stress disorder, any trauma. So that's our primary specialty, I think. And that in personal growth, right? So like the other side that we talk about with healing is that like meaning making, right? And what are you inspired by? Like if you think of depression as a symptom, but it's also like a lack of meaning in one's life. So if you can create an experience that provides that meaning or understanding, that's healing as well,
Yeah. Well, let me ask about that a little bit, because this has come up so much, especially in my own exploration of like, why is everybody turning to psychedelics? Why is this growing so fast? And I know there's this, everyone says, oh, we have this mental health crisis, but I keep saying, well, what's at the root of the mental health crisis? Yes, there's trauma from just being a human alive, but there's this larger issue where it's, we live in this meaningless world where so many people just kind of enslaved to society and, working at jobs they hate and kind of going about life with no meaning. So, of course, the psychedelic creates this meaningful experience. They maybe have a spiritual, a spiritual awakening of sorts, but then they go right back to their life. They might go back to the same old job or the same old relationship. And then a couple months later, they're kind of feeling sad again. And then they go back to the medicine, and then they feel sad again. And then they go back to the medicine.
Like
and I've
seen
this
mechanism.
Yeah. And I've seen this actually a lot in communities that I've been involved in. And I went through it myself, where it was like, that became the only meaning. It became like, well, if that makes me feel good, I'll just go do it all the time. And I feel like we're seeing more and more of this. I know people like doing Bufo like every month. And I personally am like, wow,
that'd be a lot.
To me, it's a lot. But then this is where the conversation around like, what's really at the root, and also integration, and I'm wondering, do you guys teach the integration aspect? And, do we see our whole society just getting to this place of psychedelics every weekend in order to be able to function? Or is the point to get us to really truly heal the root cause of our depression or anxiety or PTSD that's causing all the, the mental health crisis that we have? What are your views on this?
Yeah, right. And even healing can't happen in a vacuum. We're part of an ecosystem, right? So I can feel great, and if the world's crashing around me, then like that's a misalignment, So, using psychedelics as a coping mechanism, that's only worked so far, and it's really great until it's not. And if you're blasting your ego out over and over again, what happens is people become less and less functional. So there's this ego deflation. I have a hard time working. I have a hard time having relationships, and nothing has meaning except the experiences. And at the same time, there's an ego inflation that occurs. I'm doing exactly what I want to do. You can't tell me otherwise, and I'm fine, even though, like, objectively, I'm underemployed, I'm losing all my friends, and I'm only going to the ayahuasca circle once a week, So we've created some structures, like some experiences and community around this that don't require medicine work to participate in community. And we have a lot of people who are in like recovery spaces who don't use any substances, and they're welcome in our community. And we have like breathwork experiences that help ground people and integrate them back in their bodies. I think that's helpful. And then just integration is embedded throughout our whole program, and we require extended integration periods for people who work in our clinic. But the point of psychedelics is to transform society and transform our lives, right? So if you have a shitty job, quit your job and go find something more meaningful, right? Like you did it, right? You had to do it. I did it. Like I said, I was a corporate governance activist in Washington, D.C. I was miserable. I hated the place. And I took a medicine once, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm done with this place. I didn't use it to cope. So I don't think coping with psychedelics is the answer, because there are neurological effects of overuse. And the only one I know, psychedelic that I know can be used regularly without like these, like these neurological effects, is cannabis. It affects the mind on the brain a little bit differently than the serotonin medicines. And so we call it like a cascade of transformation. It's like then this and then this and then this, and then there's like a breakthrough, right? And it's a really hard period for a lot of people. It's like maybe like the goal is psychedelics to make you more miserable in your life, so it pushes you to transform something, So I think that's the answer. And I work with so I tell people I'm part psychedelic medicine guide, and I'm part life coach who specializes in helping people through transitions, because psychedelics require a transition,
Huge.
Yeah.
I love how you just put that too, because I think there's a lot of misconception. Of course, the media doesn't really help when they say, oh, just take these psychedelics and you'll feel great. But what they don't tell you is it also means there's going to be like a huge upheaval in order to then feel great, right?
Yeah, right.
Like you need to make actual changes, the integration into your life, because the psychedelic will not just cure the root of whatever is causing your misery.
It'll actually make you feel worse, and that's the point of it. Yeah. Yeah, what if you wake up and you're a corporate executive and you realize you've never had any meaning in your life? Like that's a big shift. Or like somebody's making a ton of money and realize that it's providing no meaning, but they're like dependent on that income. That's a huge bind for people too. And
those are a lot of my clients, like almost the majority, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, so my specialty, I didn't know this, like a psychopomp. I'm kind of like the middle ferryman, like I just go back and forth on this one little journey, and I help people in that transition, but from a less than from a life coaching space, but more of a we're going to do deep dives and see what the root of this is, and see how we can address that piece, and that requires people transitioning in some way, generally speaking.
Amazing. Well, let me ask one last question. Generally, I'm sure you're optimist about where this is all going, but do you feel that this growth in psychedelics and maybe legalization, decriminalization, and just the awareness and the popularity, is this potentially really going to take our planet into a better direction? Or do you think there's an opportunity for it to just backfire and become like just the next version of big pharma or whatever it is? What are your takes on the larger picture psychedelics play in our world?
I think maybe it's a both and. Like there's going to be the big pharma thing going, and there might be medicines that just help you feel better that are related to psychedelics. Maybe help you cope with that shitty job. I could totally see that. Something out of Brave New World, I can see that. I think cannabis in a way, in some growers and things they've managed to do that. So imagine the tobacco companies taking over the cannabis industry at some point or something. My hope is that psychedelics are naturally disruptive, and that they just won't just the process itself won't tolerate that. So I think there's hope in two directions. And again, why I work with cannabis, because cannabis is trauma healing on a mass scale. and it's gentler on the ego, and so we can reach tons of people with cannabis, and it might be as effective as working with MDMA and the other medicines to treating trauma. So one way of transformation on a global scale is heal as much trauma as possible. Like that by itself is huge. And then the other side of my hope is, in what I do with my DMTX program and working with the big medicines, is we're creating protocols around problem solving protocols, and particularly around technological and scientific problem solving protocols. So how often do we know that, have we seen or examples in our lives of cannabis or psychedelics specifically inspiring a entrepreneur, a high-tech person to create a technology that overnight transforms the whole world? And I think that has real potential. So it doesn't require a mass consciousness change or anything like that. But my iPhone, the internet, the structure of DNA, there's a lot of technological innovations that have come from people who were inspired with these medicines. My question is, that was, it's kind of happened haphazard, right? People are hanging out and, they got the idea. But what if we create a protocol around this problem-solving piece, right? So I think there's a chance that psychedelics are here to help us through this global transition, but it might also be there to help us grieve the completion of our time on the planet, And I don't know the answer to that. I think it's up to us, not the medicines, to do that,
That's a big one. Of course, that's a common theme for me for many, many, many years. It's there's so much beauty and potential and optimism for, this huge change. And we're alive at this really interesting time and transition on Earth. And, well, maybe it's all just a grieving process of everything, crashing and humanity going extinct, and it is what it is, and we can never stop it. Who knows?
I think that's possible to break through that. I had children with the intention that we were going to figure this out, and I'm hopeful. But other things psychedelics do is they help us see the world as it is, and face the existential crisis that we're in. And I think that could lead to potential transformation as well. So, yeah. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not leaving it to hope. We're doing the work now. We're just going to keep doing the work, help as many people as we can, and hope it ripples out enough. That's my intention.
Yeah, sign me up for this group work. I actually have interviewed Rack Razam and Charles Eisenstein have both, and I think someone else I talked to, all have addressed this about how we can really intentionally work with these medicines to actually really speak with the earth and allow the solutions to channel through us, and I do believe that's possible. I mean, this is, like you said,
we
this
see it
is
all
also,
the time. Yeah,
and it's exactly how, I don't know, someone comes up with some idea for whatever, the new iPhone. So I tend to be an optimist, I do think this is hopefully going to do greater good than harm, despite maybe the media, publishing some negative articles, but we really all need to stick with the grand vision and, like you said, the 98% of amazing stories that maybe we don't hear about every single day.
Yeah.
But
save
Daniel,
lives with this work.
Exactly.
We save lives with this work.
Yeah, I agree. I actually said I had 3 clients in 1 year last year who had helped essentially save people from killing themselves. They had clients with suicidal ideation, and I was like, wow, that is kind of big. It just didn't hit me until last year that, wow, there's integration coaches out there who've only been doing this for, a few years as an integration coach, who are literally helping people choose to live. I mean, that's big. But I want to ask one last thing. So where can people find you? What do you have coming up in the next 6 to 12 months? Anything new on the horizons? DMT program, psilocybin?
Yeah, gosh, what do we... Yeah, so Psychedelic Sitter School.org is our training program. And medicinalmindfulness.org is our center and clinic. And so if you want to be a guide, check out Sitter School, Psychedelic Sitter School. If you're not quite ready to be a guide and you want to do some healing work, come check out our center. And we do online work with Cannabis, but most of the other work we're in person here in Boulder, Colorado. We have a hotel just next door to us, so it's super easy and convenient. We're in a clinical office, so it helps cut down some of the cost of not being in a retreat center and things. And we do everything we can to support people and in their process. And what's coming up? So we have a new cohort of our training program starting in August, and our first 2 levels we work with Cannabis, but we teach all the protocols and the structure and how to guide working with this medicine. And she's quite lovely. Like, I'd love to introduce you to a psychedelic cannabis experience, and it's a foundation for the working with psilocybin, DMT, ketamine, and we'll be adding medicines as we step into that work as well. So we also have online groups, if you're not quite sure, like Daniel, this cannabis thing, I don't know if I believe you that it's a psychedelic, right? Well, you can join one of our online groups, and we host these large circles online and in person here, and just try it out, and we found that people can induce psychedelic experiences with cannabis using medicine from all over the country, all over the world. Cannabis grows everywhere, and everybody has access to it. So it's our little contribution to the movement. And we got a MAPS at our booth at the MAPS conference. So we'll be hanging out at the MAPS conference. If you want to see us in person and you're at the conference, come see us there.
Nice. I'll definitely meet you there. And I just have to say, for some reason, cannabis to me is the most psychedelic substance there is.
Oh, right on.
I don't know what it is. I liked it when I was younger, and now the last time I took a little, I was like in ayahuasca land for 5 hours, and I'm like, how did I just take a tiny little corner of a chocolate and end up tripping? So
we just did our first, we call it our psychedelic mystery school, and we created a circle using cannabis teas and other herbs, and it was like people described it. It was 6 hours long, and it was just like an ayahuasca journey. So it's totally legal, and so I'd invite you to, next time you take cannabis, say a prayer, play some music, lay down on your back, and enjoy the ride. It's a lovely trip. It's a really beautiful experience.
That's the key. Is next time I actually just need to be prepared.
Yeah, don't go out.
Party.
Like
a little Daniel, it was really nice to have you here. It was such a good talk, and thank you so much for the work you're doing in the world. I really appreciate it. We'll have all your links right here in the show notes, so anybody can follow.
Let's keep this good work going, and thanks for all the work you're doing. I can really tell you're getting some important messages out, so it's really great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.